Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Turn the Page, Syosset Library's podcast. I'm Evelyn Hershkowitz, Reader Services Librarian, and you're in for a treat. I'm here with one of my colleagues.
I'm Jessica. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist here at Syosset Library. Thanks, Evelyn.
And our special guest is
Meryl Ain, the author of the brand new, my debut novel, The Takeaway Men.
Right. And when I started getting requests from my patrons for The Takeaway Men, I looked it up and I said, this sounds like an absolutely wonderful book. So Meryl, why don't you tell us a little bit about it, and I'll tell you what's fascinating me about it. So go ahead.
Okay, so it is a post-Holocaust novel. There are many, many Holocaust novels out there. There are a few other post-Holocaust novels, but not nearly as many. And I have been friends with survivors and children of survivors, and I really wanted to tell the story of their story, because I don't think that it's been told enough. You know, people just think, okay, the war ended, the Holocaust was over, and there's really a very nuanced, layered, really difficult story for the survivors and their children.
Yeah, and it takes place right here in Queens, New York, which I think is great for those of us that live in this area. I mean, right now I'm reading it, and they just opened what I'm assuming is LIJ Hospital. Is that correct? Is that what it is? It had a different name, but
it is. I kept some names the same. I mean, obviously, so I had to make two important decisions, of which we can talk about. So I had to make the decision of where the survivors were going to come from and where they were going to go. So, you know, they say write about what you know. So I chose the community in which I grew up, Belrose, and I kept some of the names like May's Department Store,
right.
But I did change that. I made it. I changed the name of Long Island Jewish. I was pretty familiar with that because my mother actually worked there, so that was that reference.
And another thing, the doll, the Tiny Tears. I think I had that doll.
You know, I don't think that I had Tiny Tears. I did a tremendous amount of research. I had the Ginny doll. That was for sure. And
that doesn't ring a bell to me. That one.
My mother had Betsy Wetsy.
Betsy Wetsy. Well, you must be a little younger if you don't remember the Ginny doll.
But
no, the Tiny Tears, I remembered. I don't think I had it. I think I wanted it. And I just thought that, you know, metaphorically with the tears and the fake tears, and Bronca, my character, was so literal about everything. I thought that would be interesting to use the Tiny Tears doll in that. And I'm getting, you know, really great response from people who were baby boomers, who grew up in Queens on Long Island. It's really resonating with them. It was a little bit of a stretch to bring the characters to that neighborhood because, of course, they had to be able to afford a house, albeit a modest one. So that's why I had them come and live with the older cousins.
Right, who are successful.
Yes, they own 2 bakeries.
Right. Did you have any connection to bakeries? Did anybody in your family own bakeries?
Not in my family, but I actually, a friend of the family was actually a Holocaust survivor, and and owned 2 bakeries. But
Okay.
that's where the similarity ends, because you know, all fiction is fictional, and
Right.
it's never one person. Everything is a composite.
Right. What made you interested in this topic?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, as I said, my parents were born here, as were half of my grandparents. So I don't even have any relatives I'm aware of who were in the Holocaust, but I've always been obsessed with the topic. Somehow I heard the word concentration camp when I was in elementary school, and I asked my mother, what does it mean? And I don't remember that I got a satisfactory answer. And then I read the Diary of Anne Frank in the 6th grade, and I read it through looking for concentration camp, and there's no mention of it because Anne is arrested, and that's where the diary ends. And
Right.
I just developed this yearning desire to find out about what happened to her after the book ended. And you know, when I went to school, it was not taught in the school, so
I hope it is now.
it is now. It is
Good.
now. It's actually
Yeah.
it's required in New York State,
Great.
and I believe there was a bill in Congress where it was going to be required in every state. But that was also interesting. It was never really mentioned. It wasn't discussed. So then later, I guess in college and graduate school, I read more, and I just started researching it and reading everything I could find about the Holocaust. And I still read everything, and I watch documentaries. But I was particularly interested in the children of the Holocaust survivors, because I have many friends who are children of Holocaust survivors. And I did twins because it's a mixed bag. I mean, although they've got the cloud of the Holocaust over them, and they have parents who've undergone unspeakable horror, they all react differently to it. One of the earliest friends I knew about, and this is when I was a young mother, because I certainly never heard about it from many of my friends when I was growing up. But when I had a baby, we lived on a street, and I became friends with one of my neighbors, who told me that her mom was actually a victim of Mengele's experiments. Her mother
Yeah.
was dying of ovarian cancer, and that she had been born in a displaced persons camp. And she was interesting because she only wanted to be the all-American girl. You know, that was what she wanted. And then later I befriended other people who happened to be children of Holocaust survivors, and it just ran the gamut. You know, some of them embraced it. I have one who started an organization for descendants of Holocaust survivors, and some are in the middle. So I wanted to show, I did not want to paint them with one broad stroke. And one of the things I was most gratified by was the reactions of those people, because they said, I got it right. And I'm actually doing a few programs for the Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center, and I'm doing a program for the descendants of Holocaust survivors. So I'm really gratified that I got it right, because it was very important to me to tell that nuanced story.
It's really interesting because my parents are, my mother's parents were born here. They are first generation. And then my father's parents emigrated. They fled Poland and Russia. And it's interesting. It's very different. Like my father's parents, like they didn't want to talk about it, but there always was sort of like a cloud, and you could tell, even though they didn't really want to discuss what had happened. And then my mother's parents, like you were saying, like all American, and my grandfather actually fought in the war, World War II, but he never wanted to talk about it. So it's interesting because most of my own education came from what my parents told me, and then from my wonderful education in the Syosset School District, especially Southwoods Middle School. So
But it's very true. So actually, both of my parents served in World War II, which was amazing. But my mother's mother was one of 12 children, and she was born here. But some of her siblings were born there, and she always she did not have an accent, and she always wanted, she kind of I remember I interviewed her once in graduate school. We were doing an oral history project, and you had to interview somebody. So I chose my grandmother, thinking I'm going to get this great story about how she was born on the Lower East Side and she lived in a tenement and everything. No way. She wanted to present a great face to the world. So people just react differently. But I think that insecurity is there, whether you hide it or you don't.
So this is your debut fiction. How long did it take you to write this?
I would say the whole process was about 3 years. It was brewing in my head for a long time. I had not written fiction before, and so prior to that, I read everything I could about writing a novel, and I took some courses, and those were very helpful. I actually always thought it was something that I couldn't do, but when I retired, I joined the book club, and actually 2 book clubs, and I started reading novels on a regular basis. And I said to myself, I really wish I could do this, but I can't do it. I just can't do it. There's a mystery to it. And I would read the books and I try to unlock the mystery. And then after a while, I said, maybe I can do this. So that was when I started reading about it, and I took some courses. So as I said, I've always been researching this, but I researched it much more in earnest once I decided that I wanted to do the book. I made numerous outlines, which I discarded. I started writing it and I trashed it, and then I finally got into a flow. So I'd say the whole process was about 3 years, but I wrote the book in about a year.
Did you self-publish this?
No.
No. Okay. What publisher is it with?
It's Spark Press.
Oh, nice. How was the whole process of selling the book?
Well, that's difficult. That's difficult because of the pandemic. So the publisher recommended that, we hire a publicist. I did hire a publicist, and we were going to have, 3 to 5 live events, which obviously are not happening. So when the pandemic first started, when we were actually first aware of COVID, I would say mid-March, maybe, when everything closed down, everybody in the publishing world freaked out. I mean, everybody, especially the people in the spring list who had their books coming out, everybody was, what are we going to do? And there was a lot of sadness and a lot of depression. But I think actually I'm fortunate that I was in the fall list, because I think everybody kind of got their act together and learned about Zoom and learned about virtual programming. So on one hand, yes, I'm disappointed. I was supposed to travel to different places and, speak in front of an audience. And that, as I said, last night, that was probably my one and only
Yeah.
in-person
So
event.
tell us about that. We had spoken off air, so tell us about your event last night.
Yeah, I spoke at the Hampton Synagogue in West Hampton. Their sanctuary has a folding door that opens out, onto a patio. So there was ventilation. It was a very limited audience, and everybody had on masks and talked through the masks, which made it a little difficult. And but it was videotaped, and it's going to be shown on JBS TV, hopefully in September. So the thing is that it was such a thrill to get into the car and drive somewhere and then be with human beings and interact with them. So, getting back to the pandemic, everything that we took for granted now, we have to really treasure. And I don't know. I've been doing a lot of soul searching, and I have learned to count my blessings. The most important thing is health and safety. My book is out there, and I'm making do. So one of the things I did was, once I learned about Zoom, now you realize I, probably like everybody else, I didn't really know what Zoom was before
Neither did I.
April.
No, none of us did.
None of us did. If we
And
knew, we would have bought the stock. So
absolutely. So the first Zoom, I bought an account because I figured the book is coming up, and we had our Passover Seder on Zoom, and that was the first Zoom event I ever did on April 8th.
Right.
So prior to April, I had no idea what Zoom was. So now that I'm an expert in Zoom, so what I did was I put out a challenge. I challenged myself to meet with 100 book clubs virtually this year. I just,
That's so nice.
That's awesome.
I put it out there, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I don't know if it's because nobody's really going anywhere and everybody is on social media more, or I'm so gratified. I'm getting a tremendous response, and I'm filling in all those little boxes on my calendar. And my big decision now is, should I do more than one in a day? So I think that I've made the best of the pandemic, and I know what's important. And, I think of my niece who had to cancel her wedding. They got married on the day, just with both sets of parents, and they're rescheduling it for next June. But who knows what June is next year is going to bring. So all the people who had disappointments, you're not any different than everybody else. And, the important thing is to be healthy and well, and, God willing, this will end at some point. But I know that I've learned a lot about myself and what's important, and I'm just taking one day at a time.
Right. Well, I just want to mention, I believe the date is November 10th. She will be coming back to Syosset Public Library via Zoom. So we will have Meryl Ain here also talking about The Takeaway Man. Is it a book? I'm not sure what you booked with Jackie, our head of reader services. Is it a book club discussion, or we're just going to be speaking to you about the book?
I think it's a book club discussion, but
Terrific.
I'm not 100% sure. I think it's a book
that's
club
great.
discussion.
I think
That's awesome.
our patrons are going to love this book. They
Thank
really
you.
are. So I'm sure you're speaking to a lot of Jewish organizations, Hadassah and other
I am.
Jewish book clubs. Yeah.
I am, but what's really gratified me is that I'm getting also, and I didn't really expect this, I'm getting a wonderful response from audience, from people who are not Jewish. A number of them reviewed it, and I do talk about Catholicism, and I think that I treat it very respectfully. And actually, a few people thanked me because I write about righteous Gentiles, or what they call it, Yad Vashem, righteous among the nations. And these are non-Jewish people, mostly Christian people, who helped save Jews during the Holocaust and really risked their lives.
One of the main characters, actually.
Yes. So that was a surprise to me. So I'm thrilled, and I'm also thrilled that some people think that it's okay for high school students.
Absolutely.
I have a friend who he actually wrote the Barron's review book for American history and government, and he said, "Sure, I can see this in a course, history course, or an English course, or a course on Holocaust literature, or just to have kids read it on their own." So I think to me, I think I've been told also, it's an easy read. It's not a difficult read, and it can be read on many different levels. So there are some you can just read it on the level that maybe a young person would read it, and they gain a lot of information about World War II and the 50s and early 60s. Or there are really some deep philosophical questions in there. You can read it on a deeper level, and I wanted to raise those questions, and that is really one of the big reasons that I decided to write a novel, because I've written countless opinion pieces and essays where I give my opinion. I didn't want to give my opinion. I wanted to throw certain questions out to the world and have the reader think about them. And
well, you've also written nonfiction books also, even though this is your debut novel. It's not your debut.
I forget. Book. I tend to forget about that. Yes. So that yes, I co-wrote with my husband and my brother. It's called The Living Memories Project: Legacies That Last, and that book is about remembering those we've loved who are no longer with us, and we interviewed 32 people who provide tangible ways that they remember their loved ones. And then I did a journal, my Living Memories Project journal, which is a companion to the book, where you can write in your own memories of your loved ones. So that's obviously lovely. Remembrance is very important to me.
Well, this has been amazing.
Thank you.
So it's been so good chatting.
I just want to let Meryl know that I am so glad that she wrote this book, because honestly, I've read so many Holocaust books, but I haven't read anything about what happens to these people after they leave the displacement camps or whatever. Once the war is over, it's not really over for them. It's still in their minds, and it's still going on. So I'm so thrilled that you wrote this. I think everybody needs to read this book. It should definitely be curriculum at Hebrew schools. I think you need to get it out there. I'm just hoping it gets the worldwide attention that it deserves. So thank you, Meryl, so much for being with us. And we look forward to talking to you again with our Reader Services Department. So this is Evelyn.
And Jessica.
Okay, and our special guest,
Meryl Ain. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Thank you so much, Meryl.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.